Thank you, Lord, for your blessing, your safety you've afforded us in travel and this weather tonight. Thank you for the life that you give to us, your direction, your grace. Thank you for the wisdom that you give us as we come to your word. Lord, I pray that you would give us ears to hear. May your name be lifted high. We honor you tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. And we're going to read verses 1 through 8.
I said in my heart, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself." But behold, this also is a vanity. I said of laughter, "It is mad," and of pleasure, "What use is it?" I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forests of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasures of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man.
Solomon has been busy, amassing great wealth, conducting many experiments. So remember that he's looking to check out what does life have to offer. And so he's conducting this life experiment. And he goes into some of the details regarding it here in these beginning verses of chapter 2. He'll continue it further, and we will come to that in just a little bit. He comes in this very first verse, bringing it back again. All of this is what? Again, it's vanity. I will test you. This is the experiment aspect. In other words, he's experimenting and he's checking things out to see if there's anything that is going to bring fulfillment. And so in doing this first verse, he says, "But this is vanity," and then he goes and expounds. These following verses are expounding on that test of what might give pleasure to be able to enjoy himself. Now remember, we had seen that he started off well. But it's not about how you start. It's really, if you start well but don't continue and finish well, then what's the point of starting well? Paul speaks about that, doesn't he? He speaks about it that, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, he speaks of the fact that, what does he do the last few verses? What does he do? He says, I do this to my body. If you read it in English, it sounds like he eats a lot. He buffets his body. But he buffets his body. Like he doesn't go about it as though one who is beating the air, just shadow boxing. But he's disciplined.
Runs in such a way as to gain the prize.
Pardon me?
Runs in such a way as to gain the prize.
Exactly. He's not looking to just be a sprint and look how well I did for this little bit. But he's indicating that this is a lifelong endeavor. He doesn't want to become disqualified. So this is what he is drawing attention to. He speaks similarly where he says that in Philippians chapter 3, thank you. I press on, pardon me?
I studied that today.
Oh, you studied that today? Okay. So in Philippians chapter 3, he tells us,
Forgetting those things that are behind and straining towards what's ahead, I press on for the goal of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus.
Yeah, and he speaks earlier in that chapter, in Philippians chapter 3, that all the things that he could boast in, like he says, I am able to boast in a lot of stuff. If anyone's able to boast in the flesh, it's me. but I don't consider those things boast-worthy. He says those things I consider to be what? Anyone know? Rubbish. And it's more than rubbish. It's worse than rubbish. It's dung.
No, it's not. The word is detriment.
It's detriment.
Loss or injury.
Okay.
Those things are a detriment to us.
Let me just come to it. I just need to... rubbish. Yeah, okay.
Loss, damage, or injury.
Mm-hmm. One other word I just want to check out just really quickly here.
Rubbish is what is thrown to the dogs.
Yeah, okay, so it's just a continuation of the couple of words that I was looking at. All right, so yeah, it's useless. It's garbage to him. He dismisses it all. And what is his goal? What is his desire? Look at, we're in Philippians chapter 3 now that we've mentioned it. He considers them rubbish in order that he might what in verse 8? That he might know Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ, the righteousness from God that depends on faith. That I may know him and the power of his resurrection. But he doesn't stop there. He continues on and says what much of North American Christianity doesn't like to have a part of the gospel. He says that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, and may share his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, that by any means possible I may attain the resurrection from the dead. So in other words, he's saying, I'm willing to suffer the loss of life. I'm willing to suffer the loss of comfort, of preferential treatments, status, whatever it is. He says, all of that I consider to be lost to me. I want to know Christ and him crucified, the power of his resurrection, and his sufferings, joining with him, that he may gain Christ. That's his chief goal.
Take up your cross and follow me.
Yeah, so Jesus speaks that to his disciples. Yeah, so various places and throughout the Gospels. So that was Philippians chapter 3 that we were looking at there momentarily. So this is where Solomon is. He started off well with a heart. Give me a heart that will listen to you, that's obedient to you. But it didn't take long before those things started getting crowded out. And he gave himself to the pleasures of the world, really, is what he ended up pursuing. And so he details a lot of them here. Some categories, in a sense. He says this, what's vanity? He said laughter. It's mad. Pleasure, the same. What use is it? So what use is comedy? Now he's not saying it's not good to laugh. Because he also wrote in the book of Proverbs, what is laughter like?
It's medicine.
It's like a medicine. It does good to the heart, like a medicine. So what is he referring to when he says, all right, this is emptiness. Laughter is emptiness. Pleasure, what use is it? He's speaking regarding that.
It's just temporary.
Yeah, the things that he's looking at to try to find fulfillment. There's a place for laughter, right? He's going to actually speak about that in the next chapter. So he goes from checking out what's going to give him pleasure with joy and laughter and the like, and then he's going to go to substances. He's going to go to much wine. So intoxication, things that are going to make him feel good on the inside. And really he's asking, is it good? He's still looking to be guided by wisdom. He says in verse 3, my heart still guiding me with wisdom. So he's wanting to pursue wisdom, but there's this struggle with him, because in the midst of that, and he's laying hold on folly as well. So I might be able to see what good there might be there to be secured. It's not a good thing, though, to pursue folly just to see if there might be some good squeezed out of it. This is what he's doing, though. He's walking on both sides of the fence, is really what's taking place.
It's like he's trying to discover everything God created in all those things.
Yeah.
But it's not there. He can't grasp it. And his whole journey is vanity.
Yeah. So is it wrong to enjoy the pleasures that he's speaking about, digging, making these, building houses and these civic pursuits with pools and the like? Is there anything wrong with those things?
I think God gave us those pleasures.
Yeah. So anything can be used to pull away from God, to detract from God. Because you could say just as easily, I'm going to live an aesthetic life. I'm going to be like a monk in a sense. I'm just going to cut everything off, everything that's pleasureful, that brings any kind of joy, and then all of a sudden, the things that God has created for our pleasure has been turned into a perceived evil also. That's not what Solomon's talking about here. So Solomon has taken it to the extreme one way. Then you get those like monks that will be taking it to the extreme the other way. And God didn't design us for either extreme. He designed us not for life under the sun, as is defined here with what Solomon is referring to, because he's talking about toil. It's what? Toil is empty. Toil is hard under the sun. And it brings us right back to Genesis 3. Over and over. He keeps coming back to Genesis 3, but just that part. So, it's so futile. So that's what I'm referring to, the Genesis 3, because I'm going to mention that in just a couple of moments regarding the Genesis 2 and the Genesis 3 aspect. In verse 4, he's making great works. So he's checked out comedy, he's gone to chemicals, now he's into construction, civic endeavors, civic enterprises. He's building parks and vineyards, gardens. He's planting all kinds of fruit trees in them. And when we see the word parks there, the word is where we get the idea of paradise. It's actually the word paradise. So it's like he's trying to create something here that's an artificial reproduction, if you will, of Eden. We're trying to recreate Eden.
Is he trying to be God?
Well, is he?
In a way, maybe.
Yeah, is there
Like he keeps saying, I did this. Whereas, he may have had the thought, but he had everybody else do all the work.
Yeah. Chapter 2 seems to be concentrated the most with those pronouns. I, me, my, myself.
Mm-hmm.
In 26 verses, he uses those. Am I using the right pronouns, right? Is that right? I, me, my, myself. They're all pronouns, yeah. So he uses those first-person pronouns. It's never you, never them. It's very rare. And the only time he refers to them is like his son, for instance, when it's going to be detrimental to himself. So it's still reflective on me. In 26 verses, he uses those, by my count, 59 times.
Mm-hmm.
I, me, my, myself. 59 times. That's a lot of, look at me. This is, because it's man-centric. Here here's what Solomon is highlighting for us. And this is the problem with even much of the gospel in North America today, is that it all focuses on man, on self. Even to the point that the gospel is considered in light of, what will I gain out of this? What is in it for me? And all too often, it ignores the focus on the gospel is all about the glory of God. It's about Him first.
Yeah. Self is the exact opposite of the journey.
Exactly, yeah. Self, the whole idea of self is so that we would deny self. That's about take up your cross, right? Take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me, if we're going to be His disciples. Solomon's not there. Not at this.
And as long as we're doing that, Jesus and God will take care of us.
Yeah.
Because He knows we need to be taken care of, right?
Mm-hmm.
But no, we need to glorify Him at all stages of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like man is this big thing, and God is this thing that is not the cross, but added to life to try to make my life better. But it's not God adding to our lives, it's God becoming our life, recognizing that He is the source of our life. And so not God being added to us, but as though God is sort of small and He's a benefit to us, but it's where we are small and God is the focal point. It's where the psalmist in Psalm 34, remember our study in Psalm 34? What does it say in verse 3? Oh, magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt His name together. Well, remember that Solomon is writing this at the end of his life. So he's not saying, all right, so this is what I've arrived at. This is my end. And the end of my life is futile. What we're going to see, and we've already dealt with it, addressed it to some degree, is what he speaks about in chapter 12. This is the end of man. This is the chief goal of man, is to what? Fear God and keep His commandments. So that's in chapter 12. So him speaking that, he's going to indicate, he's going to be hinting at that throughout this book. And we're going to see it even at the latter part of this chapter here, in chapter 2. So, paradise, Eden. Remember I mentioned about Genesis 3. So, it's like his focal point throughout his middle years to later years have been about trying to get everything and squeeze everything out of life that he can. You only live once kind of idea that is such a big catchphrase, I guess. And his focal point, like building these parks, paradise, Eden, or Eden-like places, is like he's trying to focus and regain chapter 2 of Genesis. Man was created and God put him in the Garden of Eden without recognizing Genesis chapter 3. At least the fullness of chapter 3. Because he does deal with chapter 3 often, doesn't he? What does he say here regarding toil? Look at in verse 4. I made works, I built houses, planted vineyards for myself. All these things that he's building, 5 and 6, 7. He's speaking about the slaves that he possessed and so on. And then coming into verse 11, then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expanded in doing it, although it wasn't him, right? Because he's employing all of these slaves, people. He's getting people to do this stuff for him. But even in all of that toil that he was the source of, that the result of all of that toil, it was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So that's the aspect of the curse of Genesis 3 and verse 17. God said that by the sweat of your brow. Sweat of your brow doesn't just speak about hard work. It speaks about, the sun's just there and it's hard upon you in the midst of your work. And so by that you're going to get your bread, and the ground is now going to produce, instead of easily your food, now it's going to easily produce those things that are going to try to choke out your food. And that's what Solomon is emphasizing, focusing on so much. But he doesn't focus on on verse 15. He doesn't focus on verse 20. What's verse 15? The curse that's put against the serpent. There's going to be enmity, after he says that you're going to crawl on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. And he says, I'm going to put enmity between your seed and the seed of the woman, where he will crush your head and you will bruise his heel. He doesn't emphasize, he doesn't really deal with that for the most part that's going on here. And he doesn't deal with the garments of animal skins that God ends up providing for Adam and Eve to replace that which was, what's he replacing with those animal skins? What is it?
What represented their own works.
What represented their own works. They toiled to make themselves garments of fig leaves. So they sewed together fig leaves. Was there anything wrong with sewing? No. But it was what they were using. They're trying to get whatever they can to try to cover up.
Very brilliant. How did they ever think, I'm going to sew some fig leaves?
Yeah.
Where did they get that?
YouTube University. Right there is evidence for us that shoots the theory of evolution out of the water. Because evolution speaks about, have you ever heard the term prehistoric times?
Yes.
Prehistoric is speaking about what before man came to earth and when supposedly all of these other creatures roamed the earth. Or prehistoric times when man was just evolving and hadn't formulated speech, and he had to continually evolve until he evolved intellect and speech and then discovery and use of fire and tools, etc., etc. Scriptures show us evidence that man was far more intelligent in the beginning than you and I could ever even think of being today.
I know they discovered different stuff, like even thousands of years ago. And I was like, well, how did they come up with this? And they're still trying to figure it out.
The engineering that they were successful in producing with less tools, or at least we presume, not the kind of equipment that we have. And we today, with all of the technology that we've got to reverse engineer the things that are discovered from thousands of years ago, and they're just left scratching their heads today. How did they do this? How did they create this device? Well, to avoid going down that path too far, it says amongst these civic things that he was doing in verse 6, he said, I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. So again, various aspects that he's continuing on. Let's look at our screen for a moment. Is it? Okay. These are the pools of Solomon that lay about 5 miles south of Bethlehem. So Jerusalem, we all know where Jerusalem is. And Jerusalem, 5 miles south of Jerusalem, is Bethlehem. Just about, excuse me, I said 5 miles south of Bethlehem. 3 miles south of Bethlehem, so only 8 miles from Jerusalem, are these pools of Solomon. There's 3 of them that have been discovered. Today they're dry. Yeah, that's... These are rainwater. These are things that are in the west, what's referred to as the West Bank today. And as a result of that, they're not being kept, they're not being attended to properly and proper use of them. But just to consider the size of these things, so that you see some of these exploits that Solomon accomplished. So 3 pools. Let's go to the next slide just to give you another vantage point. This is an aerial view, so this is now after some work and attention's been given to it. I don't think they're in present use, but more work has been done to try to get them to a place of usability. So we've got 3 pools there. Similar in width. So the first pool is 380 feet long. The next pool is 423 feet long. And the pool below, pardon me?
How much is a football field?
A football field is 100 yards, so that would be 300 feet.
So the
Okay.
first one's bigger than football.
So the first one is 80 feet longer than a football field, an American football field. Canadian football field is 110 feet, or 110 yards, so that would be 330, right? So still longer than a Canadian football field. The next one is 423 feet long, and then the third one is 582 feet long. The first one is 25 feet deep, the second one is 39 feet deep, and the third one is 50 feet deep. So these are pretty significant pools. And they would hold roughly about 75 million gallons of water. Pardon me?
I was just wondering why he did them all different.
Because he could, I guess. I don't know why.
I know he's not around to ask, so.
Yeah.
The geography of that. It
Just
looks
the
like it used to be
geography
a stream or something in there.
Yeah, that would perhaps be limited by the lay of the land.
That's possible.
Yeah, because even in they're not perfectly rectangular, they're trapezoidal, because the width of them at one end is different than the width by the time you get to the other end by tens of feet. I don't remember exactly what they were. I didn't write them down because we weren't going to get into all of the nitty-gritty regarding it. I think I might have one more. Yeah, there's one more. So it just gives an idea of Solomon's determination just to, let's do this. I mean, why not?
Were these pools for bathing or fishing or fresh water?
So the Talmud and then further Josephus speaks of the fact that his wives and concubines, they would use these pools for bathing. He would be driving by in his chariot frequently, regularly. These would be used for the forests in that region.
To water the forest,
Yes.
the trees.
Yeah, exactly. And also there's an aqueduct that brings this water into Jerusalem. So an aquifer to help out in the particularly dry seasons when the Gihon spring might be at a much lower level than in the rainy season. So he's going about all of this. He increases slaves in his household. In verse 7. And it kind of speaks here of control. In 1 Kings chapter 4, Let's look at from verse 20 to 22. 20 to 23.
What book?
1 Kings 4.
Judah and Israel were many, as the sand which is by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and making merry. And Solomon reigned over all the kingdoms from the river unto the land of the Philistines, and unto the border of Egypt. They brought presents and served Solomon all the days of his life. And Solomon's provisions for one day was 30 measures of fine flour and 60 measures of meal, 10 fat oxen and 20 oxen of the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides harts and roebucks and fallow deer and fatted fowl. For he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river, from Tiphsah even to Azah, over all the kings on this side of the river. And he had peace on all sides round about him.
So early in his reign, peace comes to pass, but not without exerting some conflict. In other words, he would be reinforcing his borders to make sure, and expanding his borders, as we see that by Solomon's day, the borders are expanded significantly. So there was some conflict that would have been in place there as he's flexing his muscles, in a sense. More in the sense of excursions rather than all-out wars. So that, see, David had already exerted a great deal of his military might. And now Solomon is going to take what's been established by his father, and he's going to just expand that. So through some preliminary conflict, now he's taking control over the region. And we see regarding the slaves, what kind of daily provisions are here? I mean, he's not eating it all, right?
It's a lot.
This is a lot of food. Why? Because he's got a lot of wives, a lot of concubines, and a lot of slaves.
And armies.
And as far as the armies, they wouldn't be they wouldn't be an active army. They would be a reservist army for the most part.
But they'd still be under his care.
They would still be. There would be an aspect of that would be some provision, but they would still be probably dealing with their day-to-day, looking after their own properties and affairs. And should there need be, he would call them into active service. Then there would be a full, outright provision of everything that they needed on a daily basis, so long as they were in active duty. If you look to chapter 5 of 1 Kings, in verse 13, we find out that he drafts forced labor, and he's got 30,000 men, and he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. He had 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stone cutters, besides 3,300 chief officers. So a lot of people under his employ, a lot of them under forced labor, and a lot of them that are his own personal slaves in his household, many that were born to him in his household. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on here. He speaks back in Ecclesiastes 2 and verse 8, where he's amassed great treasure from kings and provinces, and we've just seen that really a lot of this is alliances and forced alliances, so that they would be vassal states, vassal states. In other words, they serve at Solomon's pleasure, and should they rebel and decide we're not going to send our tribute, at the appointed times, then he would come and he would challenge them, and if they thought they were strong enough, they would fight. If they didn't, they would be defeated, and they were never strong enough during Solomon's reign. So he got all of this tribute coming to him from these other kingdoms that were now subservient to him. And then you've got his fame that's gone all over the world, and you've got people coming, kings and other leaders coming and bringing extravagant gifts. And one of them is detailed through the Queen of Sheba and the camels. And she's bringing, and they're all loaded with all kinds of bounty that she's willingly gifting to the king. And that's just one example of what's taking place. One last thing I want us to see is still in 1 Kings. Look at chapter 10. Let's look at verse 25 down to 29. And are we at Johnny, I think?
To
29.
And they brought every man his present, vessels of silver and vessels of gold, and garments and armor and spices, horses and mules, a rate year by year, year by year. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he bestowed in the cities for chariots and with the king at Jerusalem. And the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones, and cedars made he to be as the sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. And Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt, and lined yarns, and king's merchants received in linen yards at a price. And the chariot came up and went out of Egypt, and 600 shekels of silver, and horse for 150. And so for all the kings of the Hittites and for the kings of Syria did they bring them out by their means.
So not only is all of this coming to him, we see that silver is so plentiful it makes it as common as stone, as pebbles around. That's a lot of silver.
That must be still there today.
Well, it'd be nice. Not today. It would have been various trade and loss over the years, through the centuries, from one king to the next. Remember, he's only the second king of the unified kingdom of Israel, and then it's going to be divided after him.
This is third, honey. Saul, David, and Saul.
Okay, so Saul, David, and I'm thinking of once they took Jerusalem as the capital. So yeah, so technically the third from Saul, and the second of the Davidic dynasty. So the many kings that ruled, and wicked kings, and poor decisions that they made, and tribute and so on, that they ended up having to pay by the end of the monarchy of the Babylonian captivity. All of that would have been squandered.
It would have come to vanity.
It would have come to vanity. Exactly. Now notice what he says, what detail we get here about chariots and horses. We find out that a chariot could be imported from Egypt for 600 shekels, and a horse imported for 150. So what Solomon is doing? He's becoming a tradesman in warfare for supplying armament for other countries, the Hittites, the Arameans, for a couple of examples that are named here specifically. And it's interesting to note that in Deuteronomy in chapter 17, the instruction that God gives Moses to give to the people for the governance of the king when a king is eventually going to be put into power, which wouldn't be for another 350 years, but 480 years after they came out of Egypt is when Solomon would begin his reign. All right, so 480 years. And they were not to multiply for themselves horses. And women, wives. And they weren't to go back to Egypt in order to get those horses. Yet what's the origin of importation? Who's doing the exporting? Egypt. He's not sourcing these chariots and horses from elsewhere. He's sourcing them from the very place some 500 years earlier that were the ones in pursuit of his ancestors. And God said, don't go back down to Egypt. Don't multiply for yourself horses or women. And he does both.
But yet he still says, my wisdom remained with me. I'm thinking, that's really dumb. Well, like he's going completely contrary to the Word of God, and yet he can still say his wisdom remained with him?
Yeah, I think what he's saying regarding his wisdom remained with him is that finally, in the end, as he's continued on, he's come back to that wisdom. I think that that's the emphasis that he's giving to this, not that it carried him through all of that. Although there's an element that we see that God had gifted him with great knowledge, so that he had knowledge in botany and zoology and
obviously business.
And business. But it's not like all of a sudden he's now stripped of all of that. So I think that he's, to whatever degree he's speaking about wisdom, he's speaking about it in some regard of that aspect, that he continued with that ability to govern relatively well. And as far as the godly wisdom, the fear of God aspect of it, is that after he had pursued all of this folly and ignored the wisdom that he should have been paying attention to, that he's now saying, listen, learn from my experiments, learn from my mistake, learn from my lasciviousness, that it will not benefit you.
Yes, it's almost like we're getting the wrong message from him. Wisdom brings wealth and power.
Yeah. Let's look at, so we didn't read verses 9 through 11. Let's have a look at that, Carolyn, back in Ecclesiastes 2. We did make mention of it, so we will, let's read it so that we've...
I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. And 11. Yes.
Yes, please.
Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun.
And when he says nothing to be gained under the sun, it always is referring to life without God. That's his emphasis on that all the time. Would you turn with me to Micah chapter 6? Micah 6. We're going to look at verses 7 and 8, but before we do that, I just want to read something to you. It's out of 1 Kings chapter 8. You're welcome to go there too, but I just listen to this. I'm not going to I'm not going to prevent you from going, but listen to what it says in verse 62. The king and all Israel with him offered sacrifice before the Lord. So this is once the temple is constructed. He offered his peace offerings to the Lord 22,000 oxen, 120,000 sheep. That's a lot of animals. That's a mind-blowing amount of animals. Okay, so we're in Micah chapter 6. Let's look at verses 7 and 8.
Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God.
Now this, Micah is speaking this sometime after Solomon, quite a bit after Solomon, but it's the Word of God nonetheless. God is telling us, I'm not taking delight in just because there's a massive amount of animals being sacrificed. The more animals sacrificed doesn't indicate the greater devotion to me. But he's saying you could offer 1,000,000 animals in sacrifice, but if your heart is far from me, then it is
Vanity.
exactly. It's vanity.
Elsewhere he says, I'd rather have mercy than sacrifice.
Exactly. Yeah. Rather have mercy than sacrifice. Jesus even spoke that to the Pharisees, and he says, go and find out the meaning of this, that I desire mercy. He speaks to them because their focus is on the outward appearance of righteousness. He said, you strain at a gnat, but you swallow a camel. He says, go and see what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, or over-sacrifice. Another time they were devoting themselves to the giving of tithes, and Jesus said that you have ignored the law, one aspect of bringing mercy, act justly and love mercy and walk humbly with your God, and you've made little of that. You've maximized on some of these other aspects just so that others would look at you and say, look at how holy they are. Look at how righteous they are. But he would speak of them later on and say to them, woe, you hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed sepulchres. In other words, you're like painted whites, sepulchres that are painted white. Why would sepulchres be painted white?
Make them look
They
nice.
look better.
To make them look better?
They stand out so nobody comes near them because it makes them unclean.
Every year coming on, at least once a year, oftentimes 3 times a year, so especially for Passover and coming on to the fall for tabernacles. So the spring and the fall, they would have people assigned that would go out and whitewash. It's early versions of our paint, right? So white paint. And they would go and they would paint sepulchres so that travelers coming to Jerusalem would not inadvertently walk too close to or sit down on what they might think is a stone and discover this is a sepulcher. It's a tomb. And thereby becoming defiled with uncleanness and not able to participate in the feast they're heading towards. So on the outside, you're like whitewashed sepulchres. We look at that and says, well, it makes it look nicer. He says that you are like whitewashed sepulchres. It's evident that you are sepulchres and you're full of dead man's bones. It's not that it makes the sepulchres look nicer or more beautiful. That wasn't the purpose. It was to make them stand out and say, stay away. These were like caution signs. So it wasn't a beautification. This was a shining a spotlight on this. Stay away. So that's what Jesus meant when he said about the Pharisees. stay away from these men.
It's kind of the same way with your tithing and your offering and stuff. It's like men with great amount of money give great money. Look at me, you know?
Mm.
And then that one lady puts in all she has,
Yes.
and they just don't understand. Wait a minute, that's all she has. You didn't even come close to putting in all you had.
Yeah, this woman gave more than anyone else here. Yeah.
And that's why the rich man couldn't pass and make it to heaven.
Yeah, because his God was his money. He wasn't going to give it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's come back to chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes. Let's go from 12 down to 17.
So then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom, and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what he has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself. This too is meaningless. For the fool, or for the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die.
And 17, please.
Oops, sorry.
No problem.
So I hated life because the work that was done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind.
So he's reflecting on and basically sharing his memoirs. Like, all that I've done, I'm not going to be here forever. As a matter of fact, my time is winding down quickly. And I don't know what my son is going to do with this. He could squander everything that I've amassed. How do I know that he's going to make good use of what I have put all of my effort in to try to put together? And then he begins lamenting, well, what benefit of it is there being wise when you realize that really in verse 14, I perceive that the same event happens to all of them, the wise and the foolish. Because I'll be forgotten, just like the fool will be forgotten. And I'm going to die just like they're going to die. So why bother giving myself to wisdom? That's really what he's come to. So as a result of that, I hated life. It was just this emptiness. Because some have said today, he who dies with the most toys wins, right? But someone else has come along and said, well, no, he who dies with the most toys still dies. Just dies.
Can't take the toys.
Can't take the toys with him. It doesn't make any difference in the light of eternity. So then he says, so because what is done under the sun was grievous for me. Remember, under the sun is
Life without God.
without God. For all is vanity and a striving after the wind. Now, so that's some summary comments that he's making. Let's look at verses 18 now to 23.
I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he'll be a wise or a fool? Yet he'll be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and the striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity.
So he continues on in that same strain of lamenting over, I don't have any control. I can give advice. I can express my wishes. And you know what it's like when somebody has a will, and maybe there's a large estate to be inherited, like significant monies, and the will might say this or that, but what often happens many times is that there's infighting between siblings, and maybe even other family members. Well, I should have, and they should have, and how dare they, and then they'll challenge the will, and it doesn't matter what was stated, even within a generation, even if the will is carried out to the very degree, the things that have been awarded to others could end up being lost by thieves or fire or whatever outcomes, whatever events could take place. They could die themselves, and then somebody else ends up gaining possession of those things. So just because somebody has spoken, and this is my intention of what I've achieved in my business or my possessions, here's what I want to happen, these are my wishes. It may or may not be carried out, but then it could be squandered, it could be all gambled away, it could be lost or whatever. We don't have control of things that are in our hands. Only while it's there that we can say, Lord, help me to steward it for your glory, to use it for your honor. In that last verse that we read, in verse 23, speaking about a man, so just a man in general, so speaking about every person. Their days are full of sorrow, his work is full of vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. What is he talking about there?
You're always thinking.
Always thinking.
You're always thinking about your things, I guess, or the problems that you're dealing with.
The person who has more possessions has more to worry about, don't they?
Yeah.
Somebody who has no possessions has no concern about being robbed because they don't have anything to be robbed. People that have no investments and no investment portfolios don't have any concerns about whether or not the stock market crashes or the performance of it. I remember an individual who had significant investments, and back 15 years ago or so in the stock market had a poor performance, and they lost significant amount of money, and they said that they needed to change the way that they were considering what they had succeeded in, and redistribute that for the glory of God. Because up until that point it was every day checking the stocks, whether the market's up or the market's down, and it would impact the day. The outcome of what it stated on that newspaper or the line on the news program that they would be watching, they'd be up if the stocks were up, and they'd be down if the stocks were down, because it impacted them. And that's one thing Jesus said, where your treasure is,
There your heart will be as well.
there your heart will be as well. Yeah.
And what does the Bible say about wisdom? Isn't that knowledge of God?
Yeah, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of God is the beginning of knowledge.
So Solomon had the wrong kind of wisdom.
Yeah.
And Solomon wrote that very thing. That's the thing. Like Solomon wrote
He
that.
writes that in Proverbs
that's it.
chapter 1.
Yeah, chapter
Yeah.
1.
And chapter 3. He writes it a few different places. Chapter 14, he's speaking about the fear of the Lord. The fear of man is a snare, but the fear of the Lord brings freedom,
Life.
brings life. So yeah, he knew the fear of the Lord. He knew wisdom in his early years, but then, as we've looked at, he shifted his attention, he shifted his gaze, he shifted his hearing elsewhere. This aspect of
Did he write Proverbs before then? Before Ecclesiastes or after?
yes, Proverbs would have been in his younger years. Song of Solomon would have been like in his youth. Proverbs would have been in his early reign, and then Ecclesiastes is at the end of his life. So
So even
his
though
son
he
said
wrote
years.
the wisdom of Proverbs, he got to a point in his life where he just totally rejected it.
Yeah. Especially when part of it, he says, my son, listen to my words and do not turn aside from them. Take this wisdom and wear it like a necklace to
Like,
adorn your neck.
Seek for it as silver and search for it as hidden treasure, to understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Like, you think, it would make sense in my mind if he wrote Ecclesiastes first and then came to understand, okay, it's all found in God, and then he goes and writes Proverbs, because it's like, okay, this makes sense now.
But maybe I think his ego and all the praise he got and just everything he was discovering, he wanted to keep on going, because I got to find the truth, you know. But it's all vanity, because it's not where he was in the beginning, where he was at.
But God brought him back to that thing, believe it.
Just think too, when he acquired a lot of his wives, who helped turn his heart away from God.
That was his downfall.
That was the downfall, yeah.
Like another king went mad, Nebuchadnezzar, right?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You say rejoice in the wife of your youth or something, though, too. Is that from him?
Oh yeah, that's Proverbs 5.
What's that?
Rejoice in the wife of your youth.
Yeah.
Why did he get 700 more?
Well, you gotta think a lot of it because of alliances too.
A main aspect of it was political alliances. Yeah, so many of these wives and concubines, he didn't even meet them.
But regardless, when God said you have one wife, you don't have political alliances
Exactly.
by marrying another.
And that's where, one of the big aspects.
Because that's where he started going wrong, by worshiping their idols.
Yes, exactly. And so he's talking about my son. I don't know what he's going to end up doing. And we find out that Rehoboam, his son, succeeds him. Solomon has already been told by the Lord that his kingdom is going to be ripped out of his hands, but he won't do it in his lifetime for the sake of David, but it will be in your son's lifetime, and it would happen early on in his reign. To the point,
Very early.
yeah, very early. So the people came to Rehoboam in 1 Kings chapter 12, and they said to him, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you." In other words, and you'll have our allegiance. Like, yeah. And he said to them, "Go away for 3 days, then come again to me." So the people went away, and he took counsel with the old men, and they said, the ones that had stood with Solomon, and said, "If you will be a servant to this people today and serve them and speak good words to them, when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever." But he abandoned that counsel and went to the young men who had grown up with him, and they said to him, the young men said, "Tell them, your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. My little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. Whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add on your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." Well, as a result of that, the people rebelled, and they walked away and said, "What portion do we have in David? We don't have an inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your intent, O Israel." And so the northern tribes, they went back to their tents, and they said, "We will not have this man to rule over us." And on the heels of that, when he went to squash that rebellion, the word of the Lord came and said, Rehoboam, you go back to your house, your palace. And then the kingdom was divided, and 10 tribes given to Jeroboam, and 2 left with Rehoboam for the sake of David. So this is the very thing that Solomon said, I have no idea if he's going to be wise or foolish. Well, it turned out that
He was very foolish.
yeah, let's take foolishness to the extreme. But he learned well, didn't he, from his dad? And the idea that even at night his heart doesn't rest, that's also vanity. It's interesting, my brother had sent we have a group text, my siblings and our cousins, And he had sent this. I don't know if anybody else needs to hear this, but I do. And then he sent Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 3, where it says, "You keep him in perfect peace, him whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you." Keep him in perfect peace. So that is the day out, the waking hours, the night hours, so that you don't have to be awake. Just trusting in the Lord.
Yes, and no fear.
And no fear.
10,000 will fall at your side.
No fear of the outcome of your possessions, because you know that even if thieves come in and take it, or if it just decays, or if fire destroys it, it was only in my hands to use for God's glory anyway. And I know that He'll take care of my needs. So yeah, no sweat off my back. There's less for me to have to worry about.
Well, even in the New Testament, where was it? I can't remember what it was now, because I remember just reading it. They said you rejoice even when your houses are possessed, they were taken away from them, because they knew their eternal home was heaven, right?
Yeah, so that's referring to, I think, if I'm thinking about it, in Hebrews chapter 11, speaking about those who by faith did this and that. You said something else, sir?
I thought it was Acts. I thought
No, it was further on. I think it was Hebrews.
Acts may deal with an aspect of that, particularly in chapter 8, when they were being persecuted and had to leave home and were dispersed. Let's finish off here in chapter 2, looking at verse 24 to 26. Are we at Jim? Is it Deb or Jim?
I read.
Okay, Jim, please.
There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? For God giveth to man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy. But the sinner he giveth travail to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit.
All right, let me ask you this. He's been lamenting a lot of stuff, and then when he comes into verse 24, then he says, all right, after talking about pleasures and all that all of this is vanity. I don't know all of this is toil and vexation. So there's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. What's he talking about here? Is he flip-flopping?
Yes, I don't think so. I think there is an aspect that a person can enjoy the fruit of their labor and doing things, yeah.
Okay, so let's consider what he's been talking about up until verse 24. What he started with in chapter 2, all of these things he's devoted himself to and pursued and amassed, all of these things, and it's all vexation of spirit, it's toil, life under the sun, it's vanity. And this is Luke chapter 12. Would you turn there? Luke 12, 13. Luke 12, 13 to 21. And we are at, let's go with Carolyn, you're right there.
Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?
All right, let's stop there just for a minute.
Okay.
Let's deal with what he's talking about there. What Solomon is dealing with up until verse 24. So through 1 through 23 is what Jesus is speaking about here. I've come to discover I've been a fool. Like, none of this has benefited me. It's of no use because I've sought these as an end. Whatever means necessary, I pursued it in order to try to get to a desired end, and the end has not justified the means. Then, in verses 24 through 26, shifts and sort of is a parallel here to verse 21 in Luke chapter 13. So verse 21.
This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God.
So I think that's what Solomon is doing here in verses 24 through 26 when he says, all right, apart from God, life under the sun, you are going to be sorely disappointed. But, and the reason why I say that this is in light of God, he says that, so we said there's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. God didn't put us here on earth just to have a frivolous, oh, I hate this life existence. But that we should enjoy the work of our hands when that work of our hands is done unto the Lord. So we do need to eat. We do need to drink. But the eating and drinking need not be a drudgery. It can be an enjoyment. But an enjoyment that finds its fulfillment when we see its source is from God. And that's why he says, this also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Do you see how he's shifting the focus from what he's been living life? He says, trash all of that. For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. And what? And joy. Because back in the first verse, he said that I sought laughter and pleasure. He's trying to find joy. He says, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But he couldn't find joy in circumstantial things. So he said, who can eat, apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. God gives joy. He's the source of joy in our lives. So that we can take joy in every aspect of his creation. So,
He told the tribes, make instruments, and he gave them knowledge on how to make brass instruments and all kinds of instruments to make a joyous noise, right?
Yeah. See, food is good for pleasure, but when food is taken to the excess, it's sin. What is it? Gluttony. He's given sex as a good pleasure in the confines of marriage. But sex that is taken outside of that just to satiate the appetite, the drive of the flesh, it becomes sin. All kinds of things can be enjoyed, but when there's too much emphasis being given to it, then all of a sudden the focus is on the thing that's being engaged in, the pursuit of it, the eating, the partaking, whatever it might be. So he says, on the contrary, but to the sinner, see, now he's got the focus. But to the sinner, he is given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. In other words, it's not going to be to their benefit. And for that sinner, when he finishes off with that last sentence, it says, this also is vanity and a striving after the wind. It almost makes it sound like the last two verses are vanity and striving after the wind. But no, what he's referring to as vanity and striving after the wind is the pursuit of the sinner, not the pursuit of the one who's eating and drinking and working to the glory of God. That's what it speaks of us. For the one who pleases Him, the one who pleases God, that's the one who's finding enjoyment and taking in. Say, Lord, thank you for my breath. Thank you for my food. Thank you for my bed. Thank you for my wife. Thank you for whatever it is that we've got. What is it?
Health.
Our health. Yeah. But so many things can be worshipped, right? They can be taken to what Solomon did. He says, here's what I devoted myself to. And I missed it. Because I devoted it to these things instead of... I devoted myself to these things instead of devoting myself to God. So we'll end it there for today. And there's some things that I'd like for us to deal with when we come together next time that bears that out just a little bit more, that I think you'll be very interested in and challenged by.